There was one company called Lulu that where you could publish a book for free, and it's still there. You can publish all kinds of things. You could do photo books, and you can do calendars, and you can do all kinds of things. And then Amazon came out with a program, and now we have ebooks too. And there's a company called Draft to Digital. It's the same thing. It's another free service. A book distributor, Ingram, has jumped in on the game too, and they're not quite free, but they have a much larger distribution model and a little bit different than, say, Amazon. So the point is that there's options. With your writing, how you decide to pursue that depends on your goal. Maybe it's just your journal, right? Every secret private thought we write, we don't want to put on social media or put in a book or tell everybody. Sometimes we write for ourselves. We write just to get an idea out of our head. We write to vent a little bit. We write because we want to chronicle the day. That's one form of writing. It's not something we want to publish. Maybe we are looking to establish a professional writing career. Then there's certain trajectories and things, just as I was alluded to a little bit. If you just want to share your writing, you can put it on a blog, you can self-publish it in a book, there's just different options now if you want to share your writing. There's online magazines, some things will just give you a byline, some things will pay you a small fee. So think about, once you have this writing, and you don't have to decide at the beginning of the process, what do you want to do with it once it's done? What's your goal? Dale has self-published some books. He wants to inspire people. That's why he writes. Ken has 50,000 stories to share. And so he writes them, he puts them up, he sells some, he gives some away. He is by far our most prolific. You think that's a lot of books, you should take a look at Ken's website. So it all depends what you want to do with your writing. And you don't have to make that decision while you're writing. So I hope that answers your question.
Would you each like to talk about your publication?
So all of this, if you can believe it, with the exception of this book, which is a book of reflections on kindness, is one story. And it started with an idea. So I like old vampire stories. And way back in 1985, when I was expecting my third, I have 6, and was lying, flat so you're not sick, and reading from a book of old vampire stories, I got an idea for a story. It was 1985. Never started writing it until 2007 because, 50 kids and that kind of stuff. But I thought, I better write it because now I'm 50 and, I can't keep. But I realized it was too big for one book. So I thought, okay, maybe I have 2 books here. And then I realized it was too big for 2 and it became a trilogy. But when you write, sometimes you write things that don't belong in the book. So for instance, if you're developing a character, you might want to, in order to understand that character more, you have a lot of backstory. That doesn't go in the book, but it goes into the character development. And I had a lot of backstory, enough that those backstories were interesting enough for their own book. They had to be developed. And then I had a character that I thought was really kind of fun and wanted to develop. And then my daughter thought I should take the little mouse, and before you know it, we have more stories coming, all from an idea. They're different books, there's some different series within the series, but it's ultimately one story. Okay, thank you.
And I would say kind of sort of the same thing about mine, except that for me, my story is me. My first book is called Chocolate Cows and Purple Cheese, and it's a collection of essays about being a young man, a young father, a young husband. I read a lot about social justice, a lot about faith and politics, and kind of what it means to be, at that time, a dad with 2 little girls, and too many jobs and not enough time for them, and all that stuff. I write a lot of poetry. My second book is just a collection of some of my poetry. The third book is called The Edge of Middle, Thoughts from the Top of the Hill. And this is a collection of essays, some fiction, and some poetry But the running theme is I had crossed over the line. I turned 50. Oh, man, that was huge. That was a big bump. So there I am sitting on top of a mountain, right? You know, I crossed the different age. So everything was about that transition. And you know, life looks different when you get to that point. The kids were young adults. I didn't have those issues anymore, but I had other issues coming up. My wife and I were empty nesters for the first time. Woo! That was terrifying for a while. That was something else. The fourth book is called The Acorn Wars. It's a fictional, highly fictionalized story of my life. It's about a young man whose adoptive father dies very suddenly, and that death, and they did not have the best relationship, which is not true, by the way. That's part of the fiction. But that death pushes him off into some dark corners, because his mother insists, you're the oldest son, so you've got to do the eulogy. Oh, man, what do I say, right? It ends well. Just tell you now, if you want to buy it, it ends well, but getting from A to B is the story. The weekly fruit and vegetable report, 4 years ago, my granddaughter, I gained yet another woman to boss me around, and now she's 4. So this is a collection, again, of essays, poetry, and some fiction. It's not necessarily about being a grandpa, it's kind of that time of my life, which was also kind of a weird time in our world and in our society. So there's that. And then my current book is called Brothers and Other Stories. The title novella is a story about two brothers who have a very difficult relationship, which is made even more difficult when one of them asks the other to do something that's very morally challenging. And the story itself, okay, you've heard the story a million times. What's cool about this is the way I wrote it. So there's a little bit of a writer's trick. Each chapter is a character speaking in first person, telling about his or her relationship with one or both of the brothers. So the story is revealed in little bits and pieces at a time, and they just kind of keep piling up these little details until you finally get the whole big picture. And so it's like I said, it's a little bit of a kind of a different way. If any of you are familiar with the book Spoon River by Edgar Lee Masters, which are individual poems in small prose that tell the story of this fictional little town, river town in Illinois, that was my inspiration. Where do ideas come from? They come from other books. We call them an homage. I wasn't stealing, I was homaging, you know. And so that's where that comes from. And again, that, you know, I do have 2 younger brothers. 98% of it's not true. It's in this book, but it came from some of those experiences.
Can you talk a little bit about the WriteOn publication?
Yeah, so we had the brilliant idea early on with our group. Again, man, I'm telling you, there is nothing more inspirational than sitting in a room full of talented people. And we wanted to honor that, and we wanted to collect it somehow and commemorate. And so it was my idea, but we pulled it, we all did it together to collect everything and to publish an anthology. Now, this is not unique to us. A lot of writers groups do this. We have some very dear friends who belong to groups elsewhere too. They do this as well. So, but what's different about ours is, so far we've done 5 plus the cheetahs. We don't set any kind of a theme, okay? So the theme is not, hey, green carpeting. Yes, you get, well, we're only going to publish stories about green carpeting this year. No, it's whatever you think is your best work for that year, and you can submit 2 or 3 pieces of whatever. So the title, Right Where We Are, is purposeful because this speaks to where our group was when this was published. Okay? And so, and each year we usually have about 20 or 25 people who submit something, and often tend to submit a couple things. So it's fun sometimes to even see some of the regulars, right? See how their writing changes over the years. We're very proud of that.
Sorry about that, Liz. 2 things I'd like to add about the anthology. One is it is a fundraiser for our group. Dwayne knows James Van Garner, politically correct bedtime stories, and he came out and joined us one night. We had a young author who was traditionally published by Source Books when she was 14. She had cystic fibrosis. Her mom pulled me off to the side. She was very sick that night and really, wanted to come out and speak to us. She wouldn't have known it. She was delightful. When she passed away about 6 months later, we were really happy to get. We had a local author who was blind, and she came out and talked about her writing process with writing and self-publishing her own book. So we do use that money to pay for that. Some of it goes into a really great Christmas party at the end of the year. But it's also a marketing piece, because when those books go into other people's hands, they get to read the writings. The reader gets to read the writings of the people who have submitted them. There's their biographies, there's their websites, and those books go a little bit farther than what you may think. For instance, last spring, I donated 30 books to the Timbers of Shorewood, and Tom, we're just finding out this now. But at Christmas time, I offered the same to Senior Star, and I thought they'd want 30. It was 150. That was painful. And we sent them 150 books. But 150 people got a book in their hand with our writings, and that's a little bit more than sometimes one writer by him or herself can do. So we do like to put some marketing in. We don't do a lot, and we're not a PR firm. But we not only want to help our writers, and want to tell them write correctly, but hone their best writing. So if you have an idea of something you want to say, we want to help to make sure you're saying it the way you want to say it, and you're satisfied with it. So you can read it and say, yes, this is what I wanted to say. I'm really happy with this. We want to help you get there. And then we want to help you find the audience for that, the person who's going to want to read what you wrote.
I was wondering if either of you would want to read a little bit of something else?
Gosh, I have such a problem talking out loud. Speaking to groups, I love to. So,
I was debating, in fact, I'm doing another reading next week. I was debating about reading one of the things that I usually read, or reading something that I've never read. So what do you want? You want a usual or you want a never?
Never.
Never? All right. And I never read this because it's a long chapter, so but it'll take the place of me reading a couple of different things. So in the Acorn Wars, so I told you the Acorn Wars is about a young man whose father dies suddenly. And this pushes the young man to a very difficult place. He's struggling with himself, he's struggling with his memories, the relationship. His mother has asked him to do this eulogy. He really does not want to do this eulogy. He really does not want to do this because he's afraid of what it's going to mean. And so, the night before the funeral, he finds himself in a bar. The next day, and it did not go well in the bar. The next day, he comes to the funeral, and he has just had a kind of a run-in, an encounter with his mother, and he sneaks off to the food room. You guys have all been to funerals, and the food's all off in one room, right? And you go and okay. And his younger brother comes in to find him. Now the main character's name is Miles. Head pounding, knees quivering, Miles clung to the back of a chair in the funeral room's guest hall. He stared at the mismatched mishmash of half-eaten munchies, picked over sandwiches, sampled salsas and dips. Half a chip emerged from the center of one like a shark's fin. Cakes, missing random slices, cookies stacked haphazardly on plates around the room, a pan of lasagna, a plate of tamales, more breads than a bakery display case. Miles weighed his hunger against the likelihood of contracting food poisoning by eating any of the stuff that had been open, unrefrigerated since early this morning. A wave of nausea burbled up in his throat, ending that debate. He grabbed the chair harder, struggling to steady himself, eyes closed, head lowered, trying to slow the room's spin. Airy wisps of condolences and comments floated across the hallway from the main parlor where Catherine, his mother, his brothers, and Maya, his wife, continued receiving well-wishers. A watery whooshing ebbed and crashed in his ears. He didn't know the cause, whether it was the unyielding soupy noise or the whiskey-provoked ache inside his skull that even the 8 ibuprofen he'd slammed that morning couldn't ease. Regardless, the pain competed for space in his head with the words that had been swimming there for days. Hurts too much. Can't do it. I can't. I can't. Can't do what? I'm surprised you can even stand up. Miles didn't realize that he'd actually spoken the words. He gingerly turned his head. Benji, Miles' youngest sibling, smiled from the doorway. He stepped into the room and reached his oldest brother in 2 steps, simultaneously propping him up as he began lightly massaging his shoulders. The pain began releasing. A universe became a supernova behind Miles' eyes. Oh my God, that feels so good. Benji, man, sorry I had to bail there. I just needed a few minutes to catch my breath. You don't need to explain or apologize. I understand. You still look a little green around the gills. Man, Crayola would have to invent a new shade of green for how I feel right now. Miles quietly accepted this moment of grace as Benji's hands did their best to untie the knots in his neck and shoulders. I can't remember if I thanked you for coming to get me last night. I was in no shape to drive. No problem, big brother. I'm happy you called. Frankly, you were in no shape to drive, ride, run, walk, or crawl. Miles stared at his littlest brother with eyes clouded as much by his roiling nausea as laughter at Benji's innocent, gentle poke. Benji often needled his brothers. Biting humor often was the only weapon he had in their sibling hierarchy. Miles was the oldest, Parker the biggest. His eternal status as the baby wasn't much in the scheme of things. But it had earned him a disproportionate degree of latitude, certainly more than Miles normally gave anyone else. I don't doubt that one bit, but I still can't believe you came all the way across town to pick me up. Seriously, you know I don't mind. Well, in any case, thank you. I truly don't know why you were so nice to me, Miles said. Benji continued his massage. Come on, man, that's what brothers do. I know you'd do the same for me if the puke was on the other shoe. Miles struggled to stifle a laugh, not wanting to antagonize the throbbing pain in his head. Please don't make jokes. And don't be so sure I would have done the same for you. Just because we're related doesn't mean I have to like you or be nice to you. Mom and Dad made it very clear when you were born. We only had to tolerate you and try not to kill you. I mean, Parker and I were fine all by ourselves for 5 glorious years. And then wham, you came along. The sentiment had been shared so often that it took on the shape of a joke, but the guilt that stabbed his heart testified to its truth. Facts were facts, no matter how much humor was lacquered over them. For most of their adolescence, Miles and Parker were inseparable. Only 16 months apart, they were raised and thought of as virtual twins, a condition they very much capitalized on in school with friends, activities, and social interests. But Benji, if he was thought of at all, was always just the baby, the other one, the third.